Hi, welcome to Rolling Hills Library and to our team drawing program. Our special instructor today is Mindy Andrasovitz, and she is an artist and art teacher. Mindy, if you would please tell us a little bit about your art background and what kinds of art you like to do. We're so glad to have you here. So glad to have you here too, Bailey. We hope this is a fun little session. So Mindy, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your art. And then the time is yours. We're really glad to have you here with us.
Okay, thank you. Sure, I started out drawing as a kid. Like Bailey, we talked earlier, my dad was an artist. He drew a lot, painted on our walls in our house. So I picked up from him, always drew and painted. Then I excelled in art in high school. Then I went to college and got a degree in art education. I was an art teacher for a long time. During that time, I always painted, always drew, did a lot of murals for people, commissioned work. So I painted a lot of murals in people's homes and in community situations, like commissioned murals for towns and cities and so forth. So yeah, so I've just done a little bit of everything. So I've always enjoyed teaching kids, and so I continue to do that whenever I can.
Terrific.
So we'll move right into this. So Bailey, as you know, there really are no rules to art, right? So when you sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil or a paintbrush and a canvas, you decide what you draw and how you draw it, right? So there are no rules. However, with that said, there are some basic guidelines that help guide artists so that they can create the things they want to create, right? So these are things that have been around since the beginning of time when people first started, drawing. One thing they wanted to do was to be able to draw people realistically. You don't always have to draw people realistically. You're the artist, you make your rules, but if that's the goal, is to draw people to look more real, then there are some guidelines that you can follow, and that's what these are. So remember what we learned today, they're not hard, fast rules. You don't always have to follow them, but they're really good guidelines if that's what you want to produce, something more realistic. So the first thing we'll do is draw a portrait, and there are some basic guidelines for drawing faces to make them look real. So the first thing, if you want to just sketch out the shape of a head, and usually people start with kind of an egg shape. So try that. And no worries about erasing or anything like that. We'll have a lot of guidelines, and you'll be drawing over guidelines and things like that. So just start off with the head. And the first guideline you're going to draw is you're going to cut that head in half with a line. So take a line and draw it, cut it in half. And this is the one that stumps people when they're first starting out drawing faces. And Bailey, you're probably a little more advanced than this, and you probably know this already, but our eyes are at the halfway mark. That's where our eyes go. When we first start out as artists, as little kids, we draw our eyes up here. And that's why our people always look like cartoons. And it's funny and it's cute, and we can still do it that way if that's what we're after. But if we want our portrait to look more realistic, then our eyes go on this line in the middle. So then go ahead and sketch in, and we're just sketching in. We're not doing details or anything right now, but just sketch in a couple of eyes. And another guideline is our eyes are about one eye apart. And I'm changing colors so you can see what my drawing is as opposed to the guidelines. So my guidelines are blue, my drawing is red. So if I'm drawing some eyes, using my guideline, I know that they're about one eye apart and they're in the middle of my head. And I'm using a whiteboard. I don't normally like to draw on a whiteboard, but I figured we could see it better on on camera than if I was drawing on paper.
Yeah, I can see it.
Can you see it okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great, okay. So now if you cut the bottom half of the head in half again, so draw another line here. And again, this is just a system of guidelines or references. Every artist knows these or uses them even if they don't realize it, or they use some version of it. If you look up how to draw portraits online on YouTube or on TikTok or whatever you're using, they're all using this basic reference. Okay, so you cut that in half. That's going to be the bottom of your nose.
Okay.
And again, they're just general because as we know, everybody's eyes are different, distances, everybody's noses are different sizes. So we adjust it according to this guideline, but for a general thing, our nose ends on that line. So however you draw a nose, it doesn't matter at this point. You can save your details for later, but your nose is going to be on that line. Okay, so now if you take this bottom corner and cut this in half, you're going to do a bottom quarter in half. That's about at the mouth line. So we usually say just above that line will be the opening for your mouth. And usually the corners of your mouth are equal to your pupils of your eyes. So if you go like this, your mouth is about here. So just above that line will be the opening for your mouth. And if you want, you can go ahead and put in some lips. You can put that little divot there if you want, your bottom lip. But that's where your mouth goes.
Okay.
Okay. So now for ears start on the eye line, go up and end on the nose line. And again, we adjust it for the people we're drawing, but that's a guideline. And what's cool about that is if you're making up a creature, say you're doing some mystical creature, part dragon, part something else, you want them to look real, but you want them to look odd or strange, you still use these guidelines. So you still, you can decide that he's going to have really big pointed ears, but you still use these guidelines to get them in the right place so they look like ears and not something that doesn't belong. Okay. Usually the neck starts at the bottom of the ears and comes in a little bit and then comes down, as opposed to what we do when we're younger, which is this. Those are our necks.
That's what I did.
First starting out. Yeah. So now we know that they start on your neck starts right at the ear and comes down. And typically men have, it might come down a little thicker. Maybe women's necks might come in a little thinner. It just depends on how people are built. But that's kind of the general guideline, is they come in just a little. And then shoulders aren't like this, like we start out when we're first doing drawings. They're not straight across. They actually just kind of go like this. And then, they might do this depending on what you're drawing. But okay, so hair, when we first start out as artists, we tend to draw our hair inside the head. But remember that hair is like a shape that sits on top of the head. So draw your hair as a shape with volume that sits on top of the head. You can do whatever kind of hair you want, and draw it as a shape. Then you can go back in and do your detail, get rid of guidelines, shade where it's dark, whatever you plan to do with hair. And then Bailey, since you're so good at eyes, you'd be able to do some really cool eyes, and then from there just finish it out with a good nose, a mouth. But now everything's going to be in the right place, and that'll help help you draw people to look more real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always fun too to go back once you learn this technique and you learn the basic, reference guidelines for people. It's fun to go back and look at old drawings that you've done and see how maybe you did it naturally and you always put the eyes at the halfway mark, or maybe your mouth was always too low, you couldn't figure out why. But now you have the guidelines and that'll help you get everything in the right place.
Yeah, I'll be able to do that. When I go back, I'll be like, wow, so that looks pretty good, but I could have done this and I probably would have looked so much better.
Yeah, there you go. At least to make it look more real, yeah. Okay, well, I'm gonna erase this and we'll do the system on making the whole body more proportional. So that's the portrait system. And this is going to be the 7-head, it's called a 7-head system for drawing people. So typically when we first start out as kids, when we're drawing, we always, kids, like we mentioned earlier, kind of go through stages in their drawing. So we start out with heads like this, and then hands and feet that come out of the head like that, and then eventually we end up putting in arms, we kind of do something like that, and then it grows from there. So that's where we start out, but now we can use the system to get everything in its place so that they look like people. Now, again, it's just like the portrait system where you can adjust it to make it fit the person you're drawing. So if you're drawing a fantastic character that has really long arms, you can still do that. You just know that you're adjusting the guideline. So with that, we'll start up here. We're going to put, a whole person here. So make room on your paper, but you're going to draw a head. And then that head is our guideline for how tall they are. Okay, so what I do is use a pencil or sometimes a piece of paper, and I get the measurement. So if that's the size of my head, my guideline is going to be over here, my guide. So I'm going to draw a head, the same head over here, the same size. And then I'm going to draw 7.5 heads. So 1, I'm going to mark that, I'm drawing 7, or actually that's 2, but you know what I mean. 3, 4, 5, 7.5. And that is how tall this person's going to be if their head is that size. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now if his head is bigger, that means these heads are bigger and he's taller. If this head is smaller, that means these heads are smaller and he's shorter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's how it creates the proportion in your space. So this is the first head, and that would be, where you put your eyes, your nose, your mouth, everything we just learned. Okay, and then they go down from here. So to get everything in the right place, if you want to make a light guideline over here, that's called the nipple line. Sorry, but that's what it's called. That would be about mid-chest area, and you don't have to draw nipples, but that's called a nipple line. So if you're drawing a person, you would just know that their neck is going to be wider. That's about nipple line. Okay. 3 heads down, that's the belly button line. So that helps you put things where they need to go, right?
Right.
Okay, so, and then the fourth head down, that's called the pubis line. So your pubic bone, that's about where that is, which helps you in getting the hips in the right place. So, and don't worry about arms yet, but, so this just helps you get things in the right place here. It helps too if you number these so that when you talk about them, you know what you're talking about. Okay, so the fifth line, the fifth head is about the bottom of your thighs. So these are your thighs, usually here. The sixth head are the knees. So these are your knees. And then you have your shins, and then the top of your feet. I know this looks goofy, but this is just to teach you guidelines, just so you know where things are. Okay, so I'm going to write this here, called the nipple line, and this is called the belly button line. Okay, and then your hips, your knees are here. These are your feet. So for arms, arms are longer than we realize. And your fingertips usually end in the middle of 5. So usually your fingertips, if you have your arms straight out and your hands stretched out, they usually end in the middle of your thighs. So that is about where your arms are. We tend to, and everybody does it, but we tend to make our arms too short if we're not aware of this system. We tend to want to make our arms about, end about here. And then we look at it and we think, what looks so goofy about my person? Why does my person not look quite right? And it's usually because the arms are too short. Same with legs. We're not aware of this system and our legs end up being too long or too short. And then again, it's just guidelines. So you would adjust this for the people that you're drawing. If you're drawing, a basketball player, a big tall basketball player, or a big tall model with long legs, they sometimes adjust this to fit extra tall people. So they might call it an 8-head guideline or 8.5 heads if you're doing someone really tall, like a basketball player or a model with really long legs. But for the average person, the 7.5 heads tall guideline is how we create people to look real. Now, you would use the same thing if you wanted to adjust and make them, characters or creatures to fit your art. So you can make your arms, that that's a normal arm. If you wanted a really long arm, you have them end down here, or legs longer, or feet bigger, or head smaller, like a tiny head creature or something. Okay.
Okay.
Do you have any questions about this? It seems kind of cumbersome, but it helps. It helps if you're working on a person. Let's say you're drawing a person sitting in a chair and you can't figure out why it doesn't quite look right. You can use the size of their head as a guide. So if their leg is off to the side and it looks short to you, measure their head and then go measure their leg and make sure that their legs are 3 heads long.
Okay.
Or if, to make sure maybe their knees look too high or something, make sure that their thighs and their knees, this section is 2 heads big. That's usually what gets people.
Yeah, because when I've tried to draw people, or like in full body form, I was like, so how long should my arms be? I don't want to make them too long. I don't want to make them too short. Sometimes I try to use my own body as a guide as much as I can see myself, and it's helped a little bit. But I think this will really help me some, especially if I'm like trying to come up with, like you said, some characters or creatures for writing things that I would like to do, because I I want to be a writer, and
Oh, nice.
so I've thought of that maybe before I kind of start writing about these characters, maybe just kind of get their description down and draw them, so like maybe I can help describe them better.
Yeah, good
And I think
idea.
this would be a really great guide. And when you said that'd be a good way to, I'm like, hey, I think I just found the perfect way to draw them.
Good, yeah, very good. That's a good idea to draw them out first, and then you can describe them in words if you know what they look like. Yeah,
Yeah.
good idea. Okay. Well, like I said before, you can look up all kinds of videos on how to draw people, and they all start with this basic guideline because it's what every artist learns, and it's the basis for everything. And then they change the rules to fit what they're drawing, or adjust it a little bit. But yeah, it's a good thing to know, and it's a good thing to practice. I know it's a little weird to draw all these heads off to the side, but it's just a good thing to practice if you're just goofing around and want to draw people. And yeah, so
Yeah, that sounds great.
all right. And like the size of your hand is usually the size of your face, so that's another guideline that artists use.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we tend to want to make our hands either too small or too large. So you use that head again as a guide. So if their hands fit inside that face, then it's a guide. And then also another guide they use is your wingspan matches your height. So if you put your arms out to the side, I'm running into a wall here, but if you measure
I got one too.
from fingertip to fingertip, it should match pretty closely your height from head to toe.
Huh. I didn't know that either.
Yeah, that's another artist guideline.
That's really amazing.
It's kind of a cheat sheet.
Well, Mindy, thank you so much. Bailey, thank you for joining us. If you would both hang on after I stop recording in a second. Mindy, we're so glad to have had you here. Thanks for sharing what you've got. And we also have some other drawing videos from you on our YouTube channel from last summer. So if folks are interested in that, they can check that out. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, Bailey.
You're welcome. Bye.